Okay, welcome everybody. This is the continuing panel that we're doing on U.S. Pluto return. Today it's going to be Daniel Fiverson, Chad Harris, and myself, Mitchell Lewis. And we're each going to give you a brief interpretation of what we think this aspect entails, and then we're going to have a panel between the three of us. I believe you can ask questions or comments through the chat room, which Sue Hilliard is going to run. Just want to say that it's a pleasure to be involved with this group. Since Linda left us not too long ago, it's been rather difficult for us all. We miss her terribly. And in keeping with her spirit, we all want to continue this this work that she started and worked so hard on. And so I'm going to go first. I'm going to give you guys my interpretation of what I think this aspect is all about. Sue, if you stop sharing the screen now, I think that's best. Now, for one thing, we all have different ways of interpreting transits, and some of us use different charts for America and for other things. Astrology is a growing, evolving art science. When I go to astrological conferences, for example, I always enjoy the banter back and forth between some astrologers who I've known for many years and I only get to see several times a year when we're at these conferences. And one of the ongoing discussions is America's chart. I know that Daniel's going to use a slightly different chart than the one that I use today. And all that's fine because it is interpretive. The chart that I use, I'm not using slides today. I just want to talk a little bit about what I think is happening. I use what's called the Sibling Chart. It's July 4th, 1776 at about 5:12 p.m. in Philadelphia. It gives America a 12.5-degree Sagittarius ascendant. And I've spent many hours lecturing and discussing why I think that chart works. I'm not going to waste time with that today. We're only going to use the American chart for the interpretation of what's happening in America at the moment. Now, a little brief discussion of Pluto, our mini planet that was deplanetized, and as recently the scientific community is arguing back and forth whether it is a planet, it isn't a planet. To astrologers, there's very little question about it. The power of Pluto's transits and progressions through our charts and through world events is quite remarkable. There's no other word for it. It has a dignity, a power, and an aura about it that changes society as much as any other astrological configuration. In fact, Pluto was discovered in 1930. Those of you who know me know that I spent a lot of time trading commodities on the mercantile exchange using astrology. I called myself an astroeconomist. I think the name kind of stuck with it. And through the transits of Pluto, I came to the conclusion that Pluto rules oil, and frankly, all of the fossil fuels, but specifically oil, crude oil. And I was able to predict the rise of oil from when it was trading $17 a barrel. I started to predict that it was going to go above $100 a barrel when Pluto entered expansive Sagittarius. And in a series of lectures that I did at the Princeton Club and with various other astrological and Wall Street groups, I proved it to be quite accurate. In fact, while it was traveling through Sagittarius, right before it left Sag, it ran up to $140 a barrel. Within a matter of weeks of its leaving expansive Sagittarius and entering restrictive Capricorn, the price of crude oil dropped from $140 a barrel to $40. It was an amazing example of astrology and a great prediction for me and for my renown and my career. And it simply proved to me, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the power of Pluto and what it is capable of doing. Now, we give Pluto many things. We give it rulership over many things. It rules anything that is worn out, decaying, outdated. It rules the parts of the physical body that eliminate waste. The urethra, the colon, even the sweat glands and the tear ducts. Any way that we take waste out of the body, that's Pluto's domain. And again, I do a lot of medical astrology too, and there are countless examples of this being the case. Now, Pluto also rules power and power struggles. And when I look at the history of Pluto, first of all, America is going through its Pluto return. Pluto takes about 250 years or so to go around the zodiac. So countries will experience a Pluto return. Individuals, not yet. Maybe when they pop us into robots at some point, we'll be able to see our Pluto returns. That's not going to happen in the moment. In 1956, on June 29th, Eisenhower passed the Interstate Highway Act. This created what we now take for granted as the highway and a throughway system across America. You can now drive, of course, from Boston to California on essentially one continuous series of highways that did not exist before this time. When that bill was passed, transiting Pluto was conjunct Jupiter in exact opposition to America's moon within a matter of minutes, essentially. Now, what does Pluto rule? It rules, among other things, building, reconstruction, repairs, things like that. And the moon in America's chart, or at least the chart that I use, rules the third house, which is the house of Mercury, or rather it sits in the third house, I'm sorry. And Mercury rules cars. At the same time, transiting Saturn was in trine to America's Mercury, laying a foundation and a structure in our country. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, we're going through our Pluto return. America's Pluto sits in the second house, the house of money and values. And eventually it finally made its way around, and now it is conjuncting America's Pluto. We are seeing the passing of something called bipartisan, look it up, it's an old English phrase, support in the Senate for the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which, among other things, is going to repair our highways, trains, subways, docks, everything having to do with transportation. This is an example of Pluto's power that even in the middle of a period that America's going through now, with a chasm between the two parties that is so large that you can't hear each other shout across it, this bill is getting passed right as America's Pluto return happens. Interesting. Now, the Democrats are also trying to pass a second $3.5 trillion bill along party lines. We'll see what happens with that. But all of this has to do with Pluto, with repairing, renewing, renovating, fixing, cleaning out what's wasted, what's no longer working. It should take a couple of hours to go from Boston to Washington, D.C. by train. It takes a day. In Europe, in Japan, in parts of China, in other countries, they have high-speed rails that move at massively faster than our rails do. All of that has to be fixed. It has to be replaced, or we're simply not going to be the leaders that we are used to being, not in the 21st century. The Pluto return will finally complete, uh, the way I see it, when Pluto enters Aquarius after retrograding back into Capricorn several times. And that will take place in November 2024. That's the time of the next presidential election. Pluto represents power. It represents power struggles. It represents change, worn out ideas, as well as physical things. That presidential election is going to decide the future of our country for some time to come. Yes, our country goes back and forth. We swing between conservative and slightly more progressive. This is one of the reasons why I like the Sibling Chart, because it gives America an Aquarius moon, which is rather progressive, and a Sagittarius rising, which I also feel is somewhat progressive. While we also have four planets in Cancer, and the sun in square to Saturn, a rather conservative configuration. So we fluctuate between the two, and we go a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. We dance back and forth. Well, we certainly have seen that happen over the last decade or so, perhaps more so than any time since right around the Second World War, when there was a power struggle. And the end result of FDR's 4 elections, followed by Truman's election, was the election of Eisenhower, a Republican. And what does he do? He passes the Interstate Highway Act, which in some ways is a rather progressive bit of legislation. But in those days, the difference between left and right, or Republican and Democrat, was different. Now we're at a point where, after many years of traveling through Capricorn, Pluto is getting ready to enter rather radical Aquarius right at the next presidential election. Now, I'm not going to predict what I think is going to happen in the presidential election of 2024. I have plenty of time to do that, and I certainly will. I always make predictions about politics, and for what it's worth, I predicted Biden was going to win long before he got the nomination. And we are also dealing with changes in our values on other levels. Now, we all know about cryptocurrency. I like to refer to it as Bitcoin, but that's just my personal feeling. Certainly, cryptocurrency is not disappearing. It seems to be taking a foothold. They are lobbying for it, et cetera, et cetera. Well, all things held jointly together is also Pluto's domain. Pluto rules the 8th sign, Scorpio. It rules the 8th house, which is the house of things collectively owned and shared. For example, in economics, Saturn rules the housing market and it rules banks, but Pluto rules all trading accounts, because you're not trading by yourself. If you were, you'd be sitting home playing Monopoly by yourself. You can't lose, but you also can't win. When we trade stocks, you may be trading your own account, but you're trading in a system that is being traded by millions of other people all over the world. And this is the collective working. This is an 8th house issue. So cryptocurrency comes into existence while Pluto is traveling through Capricorn. Capricorn rules banks. It has much to do with currencies, but currencies are individually ruled depending on the nation. At least this is what my years of trading the currencies and the other commodities led me to believe. But Pluto rules all things held jointly together, and currencies are very much a matter of how we work. The currencies are traded in a basket. The dollar is traded against the yen, against the euro, against the Canadian or Australian dollar, against all of the different currencies. And they move, they fluctuate. The dollar against the yen goes up, the yen goes back, the euro against the yen, and everything trades back and forth. Cryptocurrency doesn't do that. Cryptocurrency lives in its own little bubble. The problem with that, of course, is that there is no control. There is no way to examine what that currency is worth When I argue with people about cryptocurrency, about Bitcoin, they say to me, "Oh no, the dollar is going to disappear. It's not going to exist anymore." I say to them, "Really? What's Bitcoin worth?" "Well, today it's worth 40,000." I say, 40,000 what? I say, "What do you mean? $40,000?" Exactly. If there was no dollar, the Bitcoin wouldn't be worth anything. The Bitcoin is only worth something because we give it intrinsic value the same way that we did to gold, to wampum, to trading sheep for a piece of land, whatever it is. You can call it anything you want. It's still money. It's currency of one form or another. As Pluto enters Aquarius, we will see more forms of cryptocurrency, or more to the point, a different form of it. As countries begin to work with crypto, as large organizations begin to work with it, but it's not going to be Bitcoin, and it's not going to be the trades that we're seeing now that have absolutely no control. It has to be regulated. That's part of what Pluto entering Aquarius is going to do. Now, to get back to the restructuring and the rebuilding of America during America's Pluto return, there are a number of issues. As I said before, Pluto rules power. It also rules all things that are hidden and buried. We often say when somebody's going through a Pluto return, their astrologer will say, well, you're going to be dealing with some issues that maybe have been hidden for a while. They may come to the surface. That's what America's been dealing with for quite some time now. We are dealing with what's buried under the surface, politically, racially, socially, financially, and in every other way. Pluto is forcing us to bring these things to the surface again. Some of them we've been discussing for a long time. Now, when did the Pluto return begin? There's a good question for Chad and for Daniel and for me to discuss. I think that the Pluto return began decades ago. I look at, of course, there are times if you're going, I'm going to look at where the moon is that day, and is it void of course, and the individual little things. But when I'm looking at someone's life, or I'm looking at a corporation, or I'm looking at a stock, or I'm looking at a country, I look with a broader perspective. We don't, we use a term now, evolutionary astrology. It's become very popular in the astrology community. I think astrology has always been evolutionary. I think it's just a title that has taken hold. I've always felt that astrology does not suddenly occur. It builds and builds, and then finally you get to the point where the changes start to happen. And then you get to the point where the change is complete. Now, some of that takes place on the transit itself. I would say personally, when I look at the Pluto return, I go all the way back, even before Eisenhower's administration. I go back to the Second World War. That, of course, again, is a question of discussion, and I'm happy to go through this with you guys. But my point is that it takes so long for Pluto to complete a transit that just looking at it in terms of a couple of years doesn't do it for me. I need to know, the way I look at a client's chart is very similar. I don't only look at what they're going through right now. I look at what they were going through for the last couple of years and what's going to happen a few years after this transit completes. It's not just Saturn on your Venus. What was the transit with Saturn before this? And what will be the one following it? Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, all of the outer, so-called outer planets, it's the same thing, the way I identify it. So when I look at America's Pluto return, I'm looking at a period of decades that changed. Certainly, they say that 1939 was the greatest year of movies in Hollywood. Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, on and on and on, ridiculous number of films. And what happened in 1940 was the Second World War started, actually towards the end of 1939. The Second World War changed everything, and it changed America forever. We took on a role of leadership, which is now in question, whether or not we want it, whether or not we can do it, whether or not the world needs it, or, you know. So all of these Pluto changes, I think, began decades ago. It started to slowly move things. One of the very first things that we did was we created a draft. We came out of the Depression. What drew us really out of the Depression was the Second World War. Then Eisenhower sets up the Interstate Highway Act, just when Pluto is incredibly important in its transits to America's chart. This started us on a building, on a manufacturing concept that, again, started in the Second World War when Roosevelt went to the car companies and said, you're no longer making cars. Now you're making planes and tanks and boats, and this is what we need. And so it began as the military industrial complex, which we know, and that Eisenhower himself warned us against. So following Eisenhower's Highway Act, other things had already, of course, begun. We had trains, we had railroads all across America, but they were starting to decay by then. We started Amtrak. Now we're at a point where we are coming to sort of the end of America's Pluto return as Pluto enters Aquarius in 2024. And it will never go back to Capricorn again. That's the last time of its dancing back and forth. And we are finally reaching a point where I believe we have an opportunity to make major changes in our imagination, in our philosophy, in our physical being. Certainly, if we do not start to come into the 21st century via the internet and high-speed trains and all of the other technological advances that have occurred over the last 30, 40 years, well, as the saying goes, China's going to eat our lunch. And we can't allow that to happen. And so bipartisanship, Pluto, things held jointly together. I forget, 19, I think, Republican senators voted for this infrastructure bill. God, that's a huge turnaround. It's not, we're not in the brave new world quite yet, but it was a remarkable thing. It will pour a ton of money into the infrastructure. Hopefully it will be spent where it's supposed to be spent. That's for another part of the discussion. But we have reached a point where we have to do some things. We have to take the power back. Pluto, power, rebuilding, Pluto, things held jointly together, Pluto. So all of this represents the Pluto return in America's chart, a massive turnaround, a completely unbelievable potential, which is probably the word we should be using, for changes, and an opportunity for us to find common ground. Again, all eighth house issues. So I'm guardedly optimistic that this is going to prove to be a very successful transit. Now, at the same time, we are dealing with global changes that are going to demand massive uh, uh, collaboration, not just in America, but worldwide. We have to make changes. And those changes will come. And as Pluto enters into Aquarius and we recognize more readily how quickly the planet is changing, well, then we're going to be dealing with things like how we define money, how we trade stocks. A lot of things are going to change over the next generation. We'll be here for some of it. Some of us won't be here for all of it, but maybe we'll come back. Who knows? I personally, I'm not looking forward to coming back as a short Chinese woman, but chances are pretty good that's what I'm going to be. And we will all see some of the effects of this Pluto return soon, over the next 5 to 10 years. So I don't know how long I've been talking. We decided we're going to keep these rather short, and I don't want to step over the timeline. And again, Chad and Daniel and I will do a back and forth towards the end. But I'm going to turn this over now to Chad Harris, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he and Daniel have to say about all of this. Those are just a few of my ideas about what the Pluto return entails and what I think we can do with this energy. And again, a dear friend of mine gave me a t-shirt that said, Pluto, rest in peace. And it had 1932, whatever the date was when they deplanetized it. And now I think it's time that we renew that again and make Pluto a planet because it's got that much power. Anyway, okay, thank you very much, Chad. Your turn.
Great, thanks so much, Mitch. That was excellent. I'm gonna share my screen. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Just to make sure you guys can see the chart there.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, I don't really have like a whole lot planned. We could discuss a lot of things, and we will in the panel afterwards. But what I have here is the United States chart on the inner wheel. So this is where Pluto was when the United States was born, 27 Capricorn. And let's see, actually, sorry, I have to move my panel here. Okay. Yeah, and so what I have here is actually the outer wheel is set for the 1850s, which is when Pluto was in its first square. So it had moved to first 90 degrees during the late 40s and early 50s, the 1850s. So what I'm kind of pointing towards here is this is the Uranus-Pluto conjunction decade was a revolutionary decade that ultimately led to the Civil War and the emancipation of the slaves. But I guess we can I'm not that familiar with American history as I should be, but I guess we could say that the United States was definitely expanding its power at this time. It was buying states, it was expanding, and that was part of the issue of like where slavery, how the Civil War began was, were they going to allow slavery in the expansion of states? So we were gaining power, expanding power, gaining power as a nation. And then if we, go up to the next, the opposition, if we kind of incorporate what Mitch was saying there, kind of the wider orbs, if you look back, like when it was conjoining our natal Mercury, but this is during the Great Depression, and kind of it's 5-degree opposition. So it's the beginning of, is that loud? Sorry, you guys. So yeah, the Great Depression was a serious crisis that the whole world dealt with, but you can kind of recognize that it began its ascent to world power, world superpower at this time, in the sense that it was at the end of World War II that led to the United States gaining power, which we can connect that to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction from 1946 to 48. Like if you look at the history of the world wars, like World War I and World War II, both are Saturn-Pluto squares and conjunctions. And this was the conjunction after World War II that led to the beginning of the Cold War. And so what's interesting about the United States, as far as the 500-year Pluto cycle that we are, or sorry, the 250-year Pluto cycle that we are completing now, is that how kind of like Pluto's orbit is extremely eccentric. It's very elliptical. And basically for the first half or more, 3/4 of our nation's evolution, it was in the slowest part of that orbit. And it's just recently gone through the speediest part of its orbit. And it actually is very reflective of the kind of rapid ascent to power that the United States has had. So if we recognize that kind of like the Great Depression is kind of in between World War I and World War II, and then the United States coming in at our first Uranus Uranus return was, sorry, is the second Uranus return is when we liberated Europe and began our ascent to, I guess, the two superpowers at this point, which is interesting because if you look at when Pluto makes its next square, it's in the early 80s during the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And this is basically the end of the Cold War. When Reagan came to power, he said, tear down the wall. And it was Russia's, basically, they had Chernobyl and their economy was imploding, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. But it was at this time that the United States basically placed itself as the singular world superpower and stepped into that empowerment. And so now, just 40 years later, we are in the return, and it happens to actually coincide with the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which you can see, like if you look at World War I, that was clearly a world power shifting transformation. And then it happens again at the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. And then it happens again at the end of the Cold War in the early 80s, the beginning of Reagan administration at our Pluto square. And then now we're having the return and the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and we're losing our superpower status. I mean, China is rising to become the next superpower, and we are on the way out. Like, it actually was just, this is, slightly a tangent, but not exactly. Today it was revealed in the census data that white people in the United States, the population fell by 20 million. It's the first time since 1790 that the white people population has declined at all. And it's massive, it's 8.5%. And if you think about it, it was, the United States is founded on the power, not just any power, it's power of white men. And you can see that you can kind of recognize like an ascent to power, and then the eclipsing of that power is on the way. It's in a sense where we're addressing the nature of our power, what it means to be powerful, and how we use that power in the world. All these things are very up for us right now, how we, like with slavery and how white people have abused that power, how the United States has abused its power in the last 70 years or so. All these things are very much happening, and it's interesting. Mitch pointed to like the reimagination as well, and we're not just in the Pluto return. Pluto and Neptune have a really interesting symmetry in their orbits, where we're in the Neptune opposition as well for the United States. So it is a time where not only are we, readdressing, looking at the nature of our power, how we employ it, but potentially to reimagine who we are and how we want to move forward into the future. I think we can also kind of say here, just on the Pluto-Neptune aspect, there's something really important about the nature of the way that we perceive reality. And this is going to be a little bit of a tangent, you guys, but I'll try and wrap it really fast. Like basically, we are, I've been reading a book called The Master and His Emissary, and it's by Ian McGilchrist, and it's about the left and right hemispheres of the brain and how they cognize the world in different ways. And just to archetypally recognize it, it's basically the left hemisphere has more of a Pluto drive and ambition and a Mercury and Saturn capacity to like take things apart. And the right hemisphere sees the whole picture, which is much more of a Neptunian phenomenon. So like what McGilchrist recognizes that as civilizations have come into being, which like you can look back through history and see the Pluto-Neptune cycle as the cycle of paradigms, of civilizational paradigms. So like there was a conjunction of Pluto and Neptune in 600 BC. And then it's about 500 years. So then it goes to 84 BC. And that's the beginning of the axial period. It's the beginning of ancient Greece. It's the beginning of Western philosophy. Everything that about the West in a sense kind of has its origins at that moment. And then it happens again in 84 BC, it's the beginning of Rome. And then again in the end of Rome. And then there's the Dark Ages, it's the high medieval ages. But then it happens again in 1400, which is just at the beginning of the Renaissance. And it happens again in 1880s, which is in the middle of the United States evolution. So like, which the 1880 conjunction represents the beginning of the postmodern era. So you can see it's ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the beginning of the Dark Ages, the middle of the Dark Ages, the Renaissance, and then the postmodern era. And the postmodern era, the Pluto-Neptune conjunction, the United States is a specific kind of vessel for the postmodern in many ways. And what McGilchrist recognizes is that at the beginning of each civilization, there's a balance of hemispheres, the right hemisphere that does imagination and sees the whole picture, and the left hemisphere, which is doing the analysis and the recognizing parts and doing it so it can be functional, so we can be functional within a civilization. And they're balanced in the beginning, but what happens is the left hemisphere becomes dominant and it takes apart the civilization, and the civilizations end up like faltering because they don't see the big picture. They can't recognize the whole, and they get trapped into this small world. And there's something specific about Donald Trump ascent to becoming our president that is, I mean, he's a representation of kind of pure id. He's an extremely Plutonic figure. He's driven by Pluto. And I'm just going to say this, he must have right hemisphere damage. Like he's a psychopath, and the lack of empathy is right hemisphere functioning. And so the point that I'm trying to kind of make here is that we're at a crossroads of not just the United States and like who we are, what we're doing, but all of humanity. The environmental crisis is, we have like a decade, if possibly, to make the necessary changes to transform Pluto, who we are, in order to survive. But what's happening is that we've become much too Pluto driven in a sense, and in the shadow part of Saturn, where we take things apart and analyze them separate from the whole. And this ultimately leads to collapse because we're not recognizing the big picture. And I feel like that's a big part of what's happening right now in the United States is our like ambition for power is wrapped up in the left hemisphere. It's so short-sighted that it's not bringing in enough Neptune, enough of the whole big picture. And ultimately the collapse, the destruction, the Plutonic catastrophe is happening because of overly Plutonic driven left hemisphere dominant desire for power, in essence, irrespective of what's best for the whole. So that was kind of a lot, and I hopefully it wasn't so tangented that it didn't make sense. But we are in a really special moment where not only the Pluto return and the Neptune opposition, but we're over the next 10 years, we're going to have our next Uranus return, which the first Uranus return was the Civil War, where we emancipated ourselves and became more free, more recognizing our full potential in that sense. And then again in 1944, when we liberated Europe. And so, there's if we can address the the shadow of who we are and the depths of that, and look at that, we have the capacity to have a really powerful positive transformation, where we bring in pluralism, more multiculturalism, and more empathy for the whole. And it, maybe this will be a really positive death rebirth experience where the shadow side of who we are, hubristic and superiority complex and thinking that we should have power, that maybe that's diminishing in a certain special way where we can heal from it. Yeah. So did that make sense? Do we?
That's awesome.
Is that it, Chad? Are you wrapping up now?
Yeah, like yeah, for the time, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I thought it was terrific. And the other day when we were chatting, me and Daniel, you brought up some of the left and right hemisphere ideas. I thought it was brilliant. It's exactly how I see difference between, well, East and West philosophy, especially when you're dealing with the body. I like to joke, I say in the West, you have a doctor for your left foot and another doctor for your right foot. In Asia, they don't look at medicine that way. And it's the holistic approach to everything, politics, and philosophy, and personal and cultural freedom and all of that. I thought that was a terrific, and I love you're absolutely right about the especially the Saturn-Pluto combination. I did an article for Dell Horoscope on the Saturn-Pluto conjunct when Ronnie asked me to do one. And every time those two planets are in hard aspect, there's a war. Every single time. Even the Falkland Islands War, which lasted an hour and a half. So, it was terrific. Loved it.
Great, thanks. We can explore more in the
Chad,
Sure.
we have a request for you to cite the book. So if you could maybe put it in the chat, and then we'll put it in the
sure,
the comments of the video. Thanks.
no problem. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the share, I guess.
Okay.
Second.
And now, Daniel, are you ready? You got to unmute yourself, buddy.
Yes, I'm absolutely ready. Both of you guys are a hard act to follow. Just so you know. All right, I'm going to share my screen. I have to up front tell you, I have an abstract random, way of expressing myself. So I have to make slides, because if not, it just goes off into to never land. So I've got some slides here that I'm going to walk us through. So, I want to start with context, because I believe that astrology is about context. It's about observation and correlation. It's not about taking a chart and saying, you're some kind of XYZ, keyword salad of what's going on. It's about looking at, what's above and applying it to what's below. The star, I believe the stars don't control us. I think they simply reflect us and we reflect them. So that's how I work with all this. So I want to just look at a little bit of context of our current times, and I apologize if it might seem a little harsh, to some people, but I have to call it the way I see it. I can't sugarcoat, the time space that we're passing through. So, we've got climate change. We've got some of the most catastrophic weather, that the planet has seen, that any of us have seen. Lawlessness is just if you want a keyword, I think that's a keyword for what's going on. And our connection to perhaps our enemies who have infiltrated our political system. Insurrection is certainly a word that I think has come up, with all this dyslexic or collective delusion, or just collective delusion, I think is a good word for that one. Racism, you brought up the Civil War. We're dealing with issues that haven't been resolved over the past 150 years. We fought a war where more Americans died than in all other wars combined, and we're still right back at the same place again. And of course, the pandemic, which I think has really been one of the things that has, in a sense, unified us and driven us driven us into our inner world to really, visit that shadow and really reorganize and reimagine what it is that's really essential in our lives. And you all brought up China, and China is the elephant in the room. As far as I'm concerned, it's something that needs to be paid attention to. And to me, these are the context of the times that we're passing through. So if we want to understand what's happening in this moment, these are the things that we have to take into consideration. So I use a chart that is a year earlier than the Sibling Chart. I preface it by saying that, because of Pluto's highly elliptical orbit and its 248-year transit, the Pluto return is actually an 8-year or 9-year transit. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. So even though the Sibling Chart and the American Revolution chart that I used are a year apart, they overlap by 8 years. It's only a question of when the perfections actually occur. The reason that I like this chart is because, in my opinion, it's the only one that actually has any historical support. The Sibling Chart, the Gemini rising chart, the Sagittarius rising chart are basically rectifications or speculations, and I don't want to dismiss them because I believe astrology works. So all astrology works. The question is what's the information that we're going to get from the chart that we're working with? So there's historical evidence that on July 6, 1775, in the Journals of the Continental Congress, an act was passed. They said, in our own native land, in defense of the freedom that is our birthright, and which we have ever enjoyed till the late violation of it for the protection of our property, we have taken up arms. When a colony declares war, oops, I've got a typo there, sorry about that. When a colony declares war against its mother country, it severs all economic and political connections, right? On that day, the 13 American colonies ceased to be colonies. They became a sovereign and independent nation. July 4th, 1776 is an important date because it was our first birthday. The founding fathers, we had survived a year of warfare with the most powerful military force on the planet. And we finally had the confidence to say, we declared our independence. That's how I view it. I think both charts have validity, and I don't want to diminish either one. But I'm going to walk through what I'm going to do today. Is I have 2 snapshots of recent events, and we're going to stay in this moment and look at this moment and see how this moment has affected this chart and what kind of information it can tell us. I wrote a book actually last year. It's on Amazon. It's called America at the Crossroads. Thank you, Chad. I love the crossroads bit. I agree with you 100%. And it contains a complete detailed interpretation of this chart. And I encourage you, if you'd like to know more about it, to download the ebook or get the paperback and read what I wrote. So the United States is having its Pluto return. What does that mean? Astronomically, it denotes the return of a planet to the same zodiacal point where Pluto was, where the planet was when our country was founded, or when the natal chart, when the person was born. But astrologically, we're collectively moving through a learning process. We have some ideas about it, but we really don't know what it might look like up close and personal because nobody is alive now who was around the last time it happened. So it's all pretty much guesswork. We're witnessing it, and perhaps we don't recognize what we're seeing. And that makes sense to me. That's Pluto's MO. Pluto stirs things up, fracturing our attention in many directions. But in fact, we do have some hard evidence as to what to expect. The first thing we need to understand is that what is happening is not just happening to the United States. It's happening around the world on a global scale. We've got cataclysmic weather and seismic activity of unprecedented, unprecedented magnitude. We have a global pandemic that puts all the previous pandemics, I don't want to say to shame, but really is just way beyond anything that's happened before in recent history. We have mass shootings, schools, churches, synagogues, and it's almost, there some weeks go by where it's every day. There is some kind of gun violence, extreme political polarity, and our country is built on a two-party system, and we have had other times where the polarity has been intense, but it's never been quite this tense. And it's driven by subconscious beliefs, and we'll get to that. And Chad referenced the Neptune opposition. We're going to talk about that a little bit a little bit later. There's also this international polarization where the Western countries are lined up against the BRIC nations: Brazil, Russia, Iran, and China. It's two camps, and the camps are fortifying themselves and digging in. And the reemergent racism and xenophobia. And like I said, earlier, we fought a war, in this country 150 years ago. More Americans died in that war than in all the other wars combined. More Americans died in Gettysburg than at D-Day. It's a little known fact that was shed over racism and slavery. And we're right back there again. We haven't come anywhere in 150 years. We're right back at ground zero. The militarization of the police is something that has just creeped into our culture. The police are driving around in armored vehicles, and we see what's happening with George Floyd and in Michigan and around the country. It is just I attribute it to the fact that we've been in these wars overseas, and these guys are coming home, and I give them great credit, and I honor them for the service that they performed. But you go overseas, you go to Kandahar, you go to Iraq, and you get brainwashed, you become xenophobic. So you come back home. Where do you go? You go into the police department, into law enforcement, and that's what's happened. I don't want to digress, but the Romans, were also warlike culture, but when the soldiers came back, they would spend time with the Vestal virgins. The Vestals were not virgins, and I'll leave that to your imagination, to be reintegrated back into society and to shed, the anger and the fear and the xenophobia that they had been programmed to believe. Authoritarianism is spreading around the world. I believe the last I read, there's something like 26 or 27 countries in the world with authoritarian regimes, and it's at the steps of our own capital. These are facts that are absolutely, we cannot close our eyes to. So the U.S. Pluto return. According to this chart, we're currently at the second of three perfections. The first one occurred synchronistically on February 18th, the day that we did the first U.S. Pluto return panel. And it was 5 weeks after the Capitol riot. The transit of Pluto in Capricorn, conjoining the fourth house U.S. Pluto in Capricorn, is causing and will continue to cause the release of evolutionary dynamics that will precipitate dramatic and long-term changes to the structure of power of the United States. Pluto is the evolutionary engine. Yes, it's transformation, it's our shadow, it's what's buried, but it is what drives evolution forward. Evolution is not a fact, not a theory, it's a fact. And it is held within Pluto. Pluto holds the entire a load of information of what came before. It's our karma. In terms of an individual, it's our life lessons. And in terms of our country, it's what we've brought with us. And in our case, it's what we brought from the old world. Racism and xenophobia came across on the Mayflower. We didn't start out, at Plymouth Rock as some brand new, little fledgling bird. We we were just the extension of what came before. And that's what Pluto does. We keep moving forward. And it is power, but we're seeing changes to the structure of power as it fluctuates back and forth. And it's the sense of who we are. We're going to see, as we go through these charts, we're going to see aspects to the which is our ego. It's how we see ourselves. It's our self-image. And that self-image as a nation is undergoing a radical transformation. We're seeing that shadow, that Plutonian shadow was emerging. COVID and Donald Trump were homeopathic remedies for the shadow of American culture. They have brought it all out to the surface. Unfortunately, what has happened is it's given legitimacy to hate. Okay. So this is what we're dealing with. He legitimized it. The U.S. Pluto return has been in orb since January of 2019. And in 2021, it's going to perfect 2 more times. July 10th, which was just a couple of days ago, 5 weeks ago, and on Christmas Day will be the last 2 transits. So we're in the throes of it. We're dead center. It will remain in orb through 2024, as Mitchell said, until Pluto moves into Aquarius. It's an interesting synchronicity. So when did this all begin? Was it when Uranus moved into orb of its first quarter square to Pluto in 2009? And this is a printout from Solar Fire. These are just the perfections of these aspects, but they actually went into orb in 2009 and will last, as I said, through 2024 in some cases. Or was it between 2012 and 2015 when Uranus and Pluto perfected to square 7 times? Or was it in 2015 as Uranus conjoined Eris that Donald Trump became the GOP presidential candidate and was elected president of the United States? Or was it in 2017 as Pluto moved into orb of the current historic epic square to Eris? And I'll address this again. I've spoken about this for the past 3 years, that we realized that Donald J. Trump appeared more like the Antichrist than a great American statesman. Or was it in 2020 when the square from Pluto to Eris perfected twice, presenting us with COVID? Pluto and Eris have 2 more rounds on August 27th of this year and a final time in October of next year. Clearly, we are moving through one of the most transformative times in American history. Those born with Pluto and Libra lived through the Great Depression and World War II. But those of us who came of age in the Leo and Virgo and Libra generations, perhaps our current time, maybe it's more traumatic for us. We were born in a bubble where color TV, men on the moon, and cell phones became the norm. Our parents didn't have that, and our grandparents didn't have it. They lived through the Depression. They lived through the war. They had different life experiences than us. So the first snapshot that I want to look at is the actual Capitol riot. Let me see if I can move this. Yeah. Okay. I've got all you guys covering my slides. So we've got Pluto in this chart. Pluto's in the 4th house, and the 4th house represents the foundation, the base of our society. Its deep-rooted traditions. It represents the common people, the opposition to the government, and the ideologies of the mass of the people in opposition. And these mundane astrology interpretations I'm taking from, can't remember his first name, Nicholas Campion and Michael Bajan and Charles Harvey. And also, I have some quotes here from Deborah Holding. So Pluto represents all things that are hidden and secretive in society. It rules the shadow of the collective, secret police, organized crime, and self-destructive impulses. And it rules what Jung called psychotic outbreaks in the collective unconscious. And we're going to see some recurring themes here as we go through these charts. It's going to come up in both of these charts because obviously the outer planets haven't moved that much since January to August. But just let these interpretations just kind of just kind of receive them and see what it suggests to you is unfolding and how it's unfolding. The moon, at this chart, the U.S. was having a lunar return. So, like I said, the moon is our ego. It's our self-image. It's a revisit and a new cycle beginning of how we're seeing ourselves nationally. Deborah Holding says that the first house, where the moon in Libra is in this chart, is the common people and the state of the nation, the country and its inhabitants as the whole. And it's the general condition of prosperity and public health. Ring a bell? The moon is the masses, the common people again. So, I mean, it's not just the house, but also the moon itself here in the first house. It's a doubled dynamic, a doubled archetype that again is the masses and the common people and the population as a whole. And it represents the popular opinion and popular and mass ideologies. The moon in this chart rules the 10th house. The 10th house has Cancer on the cusp. And it correlates to the presidency, to the governance, to the ruling power, and it's a lunar return, which is a new cycle, as I said, of a national image. The fourth house represents the foundation or base of society, and its deep-rooted traditions. It represents the common people, the opposition to the government, and the ideologies of the mass of people in opposition. And Pluto, as I said, this is a repeat, Pluto represents everything that's hidden. We have Uranus here also squaring Pluto. Pluto is squaring the moon, Pluto is squaring Uranus, Uranus is squaring Pluto, got it backwards. Uranus is linked to all revolutions and innovations in society, and it's the need for a collective to permit or deny itself change. And it's upheaval at all levels in a nation. It's exactly what we're going through, where there is a portion of us that want us to move ahead, and there's a portion trying to pull back. Jeffrey Wolf Green says that Uranus, the people with Uranus, everybody wants things to change, but some of us wanted to change by going forward progressively. Some of us wanted to change by going back to the way that it was. One third of the people, and again, this is a generalization, but 1/3 of the people do want the progressive change, and 1/3 want the regressive change, and then there's 1/3 in the middle that are on the fence. And again, that's what we're up against, is that middle ground of I don't want to call it complacency, but non-commitment. And the 8th house is public mortality. It's the death rate, and it's the kinds of people who die. In evolutionary astrology, the 8th house correlates to the challenges that Pluto puts in front of us that we have been unable to resolve or face on our own. It puts a wall in front of us, and it points to that wall, and Pluto says, you're going over that wall. Do you want to go head first or feet first? That's what happens in the 8th house. It's our most difficult challenges. And we've got also a square to Mars. Mars is at 29 degrees, Pluto's at 24, so Mars is separating. So it's reflecting, something that's really in the past and is moving away, but it represents the forces which hold the state together and drive it apart in terms of aggression. It shows that which helps a society to grow and assert itself, and it can show internal violence from criminal and antisocial acts or from riots and rebellions. It rules the 7th, correlates to public enemies, enemies of the nation, outlaws and fugitives who are not imprisoned. Hold on to that. It's going to be a recurring theme. So if we break down some of these aspects again, we see that this is the Neptune opposition the chat is talking about. It occurred last in the years leading up to the Civil War. And surprise, surprise, here we are again, fighting those same battles of beliefs and collective delusion. It's a deep polarity of beliefs that must be balanced. And peaceful resolution of conflicting beliefs through mutual understanding, forgiveness, acceptance is essential to the survival of the nation and the advancement of that which serves the greater good. We have to come to terms and understand, that this is we need some forgiveness. I'm not saying we forgive somebody who, invaded the Capitol and wanted to tear it apart, but we have to understand that these are people who are angry. And, there's part of me that understands why they're angry. Okay. And I don't want to get into the politics. I certainly, I think QAnon is madness, but, the vaxxers, the anti-vaxxers, astrology is a science. I'm a scientist to a degree. I have to go with the science. I may not agree with it. I may know all the things that are wrong with it, but it's a matter of life and death. We have to face the realities of life and not just follow some ideological whim. And the Neptune opposition is causing dramatic exposure and conflict, causing by increasingly divisive social, political, and economic polarity. The nodes the transiting nodes are in third and ninth house. The third house are rumors and propaganda, the press, post office. We had some post office crises this year. Communications networks, certainly all of the social networks, I think, fit into that category. And news publications of all kinds. We've got Fox News and CNN, facing off every day in the press. And the ninth house is religion in the church. I mean, hello, I don't want to get into it. Unsavory cults and dogmatic religious organizations. And it's also university, colleges, and all places of higher learning. Again, this is one of the great debates that we're having. We open the schools. Do the kids have to wear masks? Who gets vaccinated? Do we have to? They have. These are the issues that are on the table. And Mercury rules the 11th house. It's about Congress. And we see the deadlocks in Congress. Neptune, more than any other planet, is associated with subversion. It rules socialism and all new visions and dreams of the perfect society. And the people, excuse the typo, the people who promote such dreams. It can rule delusions and therefore disillusion. And Vesta. I alluded to Vesta before. She's about authenticity. She was tasked with guarding the sacred fire in every home and in the community. They were revered above the senators in Roman culture. I've kind of described what one of their roles was in that community. But it's about authenticity, and it's about our sacred commitment to self. Nationally, it's about our sacred commitment to our national self, to what's sacred, and to me, that's the U.S. Constitution. It is a sacred commitment to the rule of law. What we're going through is the greatest test of the rule of law in our history, and it speaks to the tending the sacred fire of the community, because failing to do so bodes ill for the nation as a whole. So just as an example of what's going on, I want to just kind of walk through COVID here. In January 8th of this year, COVID peaked at almost 288,000, almost 300,000 new cases. On August 7th, just a few weeks ago, actually just last week or so, it bottomed out at 4,000 new cases, okay? On July 10th, it actually, I think that these charts don't, excuse me. This was June 27th. I'm sorry. This is the date that I took these graphs from. So on June 27th, it bottomed out at 4,000 cases. On July 10th, which is the date that I'm using as the second Pluto return, there were almost 9,000 new cases. We were all the way on the back up again. And as of the other day, when I put these slides together, we were at almost 256,000 new cases in the United States. We're right back where we were at the peak of the third wave. We're headed right to it, and maybe even going to surpass it. I don't want to get into the science of COVID. I'll leave that for another talk. So, if we look at the Pluto return at the July 10th date, again, we have Pluto, fourth house, which I kind of reviewed, but it is in a sesqui-square to the lunar north node. And we know that the lunar nodes are our karmic trajectory. They are the evolutionary pathway from past to future through the present. But it's a probable future. There are many futures that are out there. It is a hologram. And the future is determined by the choices we make in the present. What we choose today is going to determine what happens tomorrow. Eris is squaring Pluto. We'll talk about this, actually, Pluto squaring Eris. We'll talk about this as well because not only is Pluto squaring Eris by outer planet transit, but Eris is squaring Pluto as a transit from Eris itself to US Pluto. And Eris generates evolutionary crises which seek to resolve long-standing issues which have found no other means of resolution. Eris, believe it or not, is our friend. She's chaos and discord. She's culpable or, assigned culpability for the Trojan War. But at the end of the Trojan War, one of the members of the Trojan royal family, whose name was Aeneas, anybody who studied any mythology is familiar with Aeneas, sailed to Italy and founded the city of Rome, which was a civilization that lasted for 1,000 years. So this is the type of space that we're moving through historically. Yes, we may, the Trojan War was the end of the Greek classical age. At the end of that time, all of the heroes of the Greek culture were in the underworld. Odysseus visits them in the Odyssey. We've got both sides here, shadow and light. But at the moment, we're seeing the shadow. Seventh house, again, public enemies and Pluto. Those we've kind of reviewed those. But again, these are recurring themes. So what you see in black here are all recurring themes. This Pluto return occurred at a Cancer new moon. So not only is it a solar return for the country, but it was a new phase, a moon as well. So it's a doubled new cycle of self-becoming that was initiated at this new Pluto return cycle. And the 10th house, again, is the presidency. It's the governance, and it is our national reputation. And at the same time, Pluto was also sesqui-squaring Jupiter in the 9th house. So the 9th house is, society or nation needs common values and belief systems if it's going to hold together. And this is what is ruled by Jupiter in mundane astrology. Thus, Jupiter represents the law and represents religion. And in this chart, Jupiter rules the 3rd house. It's our rumors, our propaganda, the press, and all of the news publications. And we've got all these things in the mix. What is true? The Gemini Sagittarian nodes are all about truth and untruth. They're all about beliefs and ideas. An idea is not a belief. An idea is just something that we think. That doesn't make it real. But I'll come back to that idea in another slide or two. And again, we have a square also to the moon from Pluto. I think we looked at that in the capital Raya chart. Huge changes to the way that we see ourselves, to the American ego. So we do have some facilitating aspects, but we have to understand that everybody sees a grand trine and says, "Oh, I'm so happy I have a grand trine, and I don't want to have a grand cross." Well, it happens that the grand trines can make us into a couch potato, because a trine will come and will pass totally unobserved. We have to engage with it. We have to engage with our north node too. The north node is a little bit more potentialized, but a trine doesn't really, it has potential, but we have to step into it. Unless we actively reach out and work with it, it'll probably pass by, and all of its benefits will pass us by. But this is activating a grand trine that is in the US chart to begin with, between Pluto, Ceres, and Mars. What's interesting about this transit is Pallas Athena. Pallas Athena was the most important member of the most important female member of the Greek pantheon after Zeus. Both Homer and Hesiod when they talk about the pantheon, they in this order they list the gods. It's Zeus, Athena, Apollo. She was above Hera. She was above all the other goddesses. She was the most revered goddess of the pantheon. Athens was named for her. She was a woman in a man's world, but yet she fought fiercely in battle. But she also supported the work of weavers and potters, and she taught men how to harness horses to aid their labors, among other things. There isn't room here to list all of the things that she did, that she has done, but she's an amazing figure in Greek mythology. And she, here she is, prominent in this chart. Look what's happening in Congress. For the first time in history, we have two women who when the joint Congress meets, it's Nancy Pelosi and our vice president. Her name escapes me. I'm sorry, that's my random abstract mind. Two women sitting there chairing Congress. It has never happened before, and the progressive movement is all headed up by these younger women congressmen and senators. The squad, these progressives. I'm proud to be from New Mexico with Deb Haaland, the first Native American, on the cabinet who has governance over the Interior Department. Thank God for her to be able to save all the destruction that's happening to this western countryside. That is really my playground. And here she is in the sixth house, which rules, by the way, public health and health workers and the health of society. It doesn't need any explanation. We can all see how that's working out. And again, we have Mars here trined. We had Mars squared at the Capitol riot. Now we have Pluto in a trine to Mars. But again, that trine could also be a very aggressive thing. It doesn't mean that it's going to be non-aggressive. Just because Mars has a trine doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden going to become placid. And it's in it's the 12th house. It's the prison systems, criminals, spies, secret enemies at home and abroad, and underground movements, covert societies, and hidden groups. And then Ceres. Ceres, we don't have to go into the mythology. Most of us know the story of Ceres and Persephone. But from an EA perspective, or an astrological perspective, it correlates to our greatest personal loss. It's some loss that is unimaginable, okay? But it's also our ability to nurture ourselves and others. And this is a trine that is supportive. I think the Mars trine is also supportive because it's about our choices. And it really comes down to that North Node opposition to Neptune that we looked at, the North Node square from Susquehanna square from Pluto, is that we really have to look at the choices that we're making. And COVID is teaching us that we really need to nurture ourselves and nurture others, that it's nurturing that's important, that it's that kind of bond between us that makes us healthy. So the Neptune opposition is still active. We see it right here. It's been in orb to US Neptune since April of 2020. The opposition perfected last year in August, and it perfected in March of this year, and it'll be in orb through January of next year. And it last occurred, as I said, during the American Civil War. And I'll repeat it, it's causing dramatic exposure and conflict caused by increasing divisive social, political, and economic polarity and beliefs. And Mars again, we've got an opposition to Mars. Now my favorite new planet is Eris. Like I said, she generates evolutionary crises. And she's in the 7th house, public enemies, enemies of the nation, outlaws and fugitives who are not imprisoned. So, we saw a picture of not our late president, but our previous president and Vladimir Putin. I think it's a perfect example of what this is. The last quarter square from Pluto to Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn to Eris and Aries has not occurred in 2,700 years since the Axial Age in 691 BCE. Okay, so crises erupt that compel evolutionary growth for the United States. And there are traumatic stresses on the country as a whole and chaotic disruption to the general welfare of the country and the people at large, as well as pressures to the forward direction of the United States. And Pallas is also active here again. As I said, she was the most important member of the Greek pantheon. She's in the second house in the U.S. chart, which again represents banks, financial resources, wealth, the economy, gross national product, and also the security and insecurity of the country itself and the country's deeper priorities and values. These are all the things that are at stake and all the things that are in flux. And it could certainly be, with this inconjunct from Eris, it could certainly be an indication of economic fluctuations, and that's perhaps being polite. The lunar north node is also in play again. We've got a trine to the north node, and this is Eris. We're actually working, massaging the future. We're seeing the future emerge, but it's we're still the little chick, pecking our way out of the egg. Okay, we still have to fight our way into life. It's not getting handed to us. We have to earn it. And we've got a yod from Mars and Pallas Athena to Eris as the focal point. So again, it's our choices, and it's our basically it's our strategy and our wisdom. We need to bring wisdom to bear here. She was the goddess of wisdom and strategy. Transiting Eris square its US Pluto has been in orb since 2017, going to perfect 9 times to this chart from 2026 to 2030, and it will remain in orb until 2039. So some last words just to pull this all together. We've seen tremendous changes to our freedoms and way of life as Uranus and Pluto, Uranus and Eris served up their energetic cocktails. Changes will continue as the outer planets substantiate what has been initiated. Uranus will enter Gemini in 2026. After the current Pluto return and Neptune opposition, the United States will have its Uranus return. And it's a terribly inconvenient truth that 3 major wars, the American Revolution, the Civil War, and World War II, occurred when Uranus was in Gemini. What we're experiencing as the cycle emerges holds up the mirror of what the next 2 decades will look like. We will not see another major outer planet conjunction until the late 2030s. The Pluto squares to Eris will be the last major astrological event until Neptune-Eris conjunctions in 2037. In the early 2040s, Uranus squares Eris and then Neptune, and those years will be a major turning point on the road ahead. The great thinkers and masters who walked the earth have all left us with the same message. We are dreaming a reality. The first Hermetic principle is that the universe is mental. We have been told over and over in too many languages to count that there's only one of us on the planet. The primal frequency that binds the universe together is love. When we realize these truths and begin to live by them, we will finally achieve what we call peace on earth. We need to make ourselves strong physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The storm clouds will dissipate. We will see a new day. It will be a golden age. If not us, then our children and our grandchildren will see it. The Pluto and Sagittarius generation will actualize the new truth, and the Pluto and Capricorn generation will harness that truth and build the new earth. Thank you.
That was great, Daniel. Terrific stuff.
You unmute yourself.
Man.
Can you stop your screen share, Daniel, please? Thank you.
I shouldn't be muted, am I?
No.
Well, now you've had 3 different opinions or perspectives on Pluto. And each one is quite, I enjoyed both Chad and Daniel's interpretations. I thought they were great. Anybody have any questions out there? Please let us know. I think Sue has the chat room, so she'll respond or present them to us. I guess what we should do is just, the three of us can open up our, unmute yourself, Chad, if you have something to say. And, as I said at the beginning, we're not going to agree on everything, and some of the charts are slightly different and whatnot. The interpretation, however, seems fairly common. We all realize that we are at a crossroads, not just in America, but in the world. And the changes that we're facing are astronomical, astrological, if you will. And if we don't get a handle on things, well, then we'll see each other on the other side. But I try to be an optimist. I look for the best in individuals and in the collective. I agree with Daniel when he said that we are facing a period of cleansing. I'm not sure you used that word, but that's what I got out of it. And we have to dig deep. That's what Pluto wants. We have to bring things to the surface. Racism, xenophobia, all the problems between our different sense of who we are. We're seeing it politically. We've recently had a minor event in New York State you may have heard of. And all of this is coming to the surface. All of this is being brought out. And it's only by bringing it out into the public that we can expose it, talk about it, and grow. And we certainly are all sensing, not just politically, but in terms of climate change and in some of the changes that we are facing. And if we don't find commonality, we don't find a way to put our collective shoulder to the stone, so to speak, well, then there isn't going to be much left. And while we do have responsibilities as individuals and as a collective, we also have a desire to live and to enjoy our lives. And sometimes a generation, we call the World War II generation the greatest generation, and there's a reason for that. They lived through the Depression and the Second World War. I lived through Howdy Doody and Vietnam. We certainly have always had our conflicts and our interpretation of what we're supposed to do. And now we're facing a brand new kind of collective fight. And that's the fight to save the planet, to deal with what we share financially and in every other way. And that's where I'd like to open up the conversation for you guys and for anybody in the chat room. And Robin, if you'd like to add something, please do. I think that we have to find a way to settle things down. Otherwise, we're going to be fighting against each other and we're never going to get anywhere. So jump in, guys. What have you got to say?
Yeah, thanks, Mitchell. I totally agree with that, and I appreciate everything that Daniel was bringing up. I think somewhere at the end there, where I think Daniel was discussing like the divisiveness that's clearly evident in our society now, and it's interesting for like climate change. Like what is our responsibility to the planet? What do we need to do to change to bring ourselves into sustainable relationship? And what's interesting about this that I'm really recognizing in like the anti-vax and the anti-mask divisions in the United States is that like, a lot of it is based on the idea of personal freedom that the United States and France is what brought it into into the world in the modern era. And initially it was just for white men that were free, that had these inalienable rights to do whatever they felt wise relative to the authorities. But all of that was conceptualized and brought into practice in, you know, the late 1700s, when, before Darwin, before the understanding of limited finite resources, and like, you know, the idea, I mean, I think it's important, crucially important, that the American and French revolutions happened and that it birthed this independent, individuated, free, independent thinking people to have their own rights. But the idea of libertarian freedom, in the sense that that is based on it from the United States, is no longer sustainable, if it really ever was. But like, you know, we don't actually have some actual independent existence. We breathe the same air.
A massive war. Yes, it's a war of independence, so to speak. The American Revolution, the American Civil War, the end of Hitler and whatnot. But still, it is a nation, and I think that that's what we're heading towards too. What the outcome of that will be, well, that's, I'd like to hear you guys what your opinion is.
Well, not to make matters worse, but actually World War II began at the end of Uranus in Taurus.
I'm aware of that. Yeah.
It was retrograde, the end of Taurus. you know, there's so many things, issues that swirl around. You know, we talk about the Constitution, we talk about freedom, but you know, how many people really understand or know that when the Constitution was written, it was basically written to protect property rights. There's not one word in the U.S. Constitution that protects individual rights. And it's only in the last 50 years that any of that has been addressed. And that's really the uphill battle that's still going on. You know, we talk about, you know, of having the right to vote and the right, but women couldn't vote. You know, blacks couldn't vote. Indians couldn't vote. You know, it's
you have to put things in perspective of the times, Daniel. You can't say that the American Constitution and think of it in terms of modern times. You have to look at when it was written, and it was written with it. The founders of the Constitution had their hands handcuffed by the times they lived in. This is why one generation can never judge another generation's attitude.
The founding fathers had slaves, Mitchell.
I understand that, Daniel. I read. I know American history. That's okay. You don't have to point that out to me. I'm very aware of it. I'm also aware of the fact that at one point, New York State had more slaves than freemen.
Right.
That's got nothing to do with the fact that the Constitution was created as a living and growing document that allows amendments, that allows change to occur through history. It's not written in stone. And nor can you compare in 2021 how we feel about the world with what the people who wrote that Constitution were living through.
I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that that's what we're exhuming. You know, we talk about Pluto as what's buried and hidden in the ground. This is what we're exhuming. These are the corpses that we're digging up.
Yes, I know. And we talked about all of that. And I think we're all quite aware of that. And the fact that racism and all the rest of it is what's being dug up.
My point, what I was trying to point towards is that, like, it seems as though everyone in the United States now, after civil rights and women's rights movements and stuff, have adopted or appropriated that sense of individual freedom that was just granted to white men initially. And my point is that idea that that we're free and have inalienable rights in the sense that, like, we don't have responsibility to the whole, that's where it's a mistake. You know, we have to recognize that no one should be more free than other people in the sense of their empowerment. I mean, that's what we're talking about with Pluto and the empowerment. And, like, people, it seems as though they've been empowered with this sense of rights and freedom that is based on white supremacy.
You guys know this book, Howard Zinn's book.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Howard Zinn? Mm-hmm. He's a very good friend of my brother's. They used to play tennis together a great deal. And when he was writing this book, my brother used to hang out with him a lot. He was a student of Howard's. If you really want to get pissed off, pick this book up and read it again. If you've never read it, then read it for the first time. I happen to have found it, and I'm in the process of rereading it again. It talks about the American history through the eyes of the people, not the people who control it, not the people of power. And starting, of course, with Columbus and with the terrible things that white Europeans did when they came here, and on and on and on and on and on. And it's a fascinating book. It's one of the greatest books about American history that I've ever read. There's no question, but we are in this power struggle of Pluto. That's why we're having this panel. But my point is not to put blinders on any more than people put blinders on when they believe in any political perspective. We are evolving. We are trying to make changes. We are trying to grow and learn. Now, some people are more open to learning than others, obviously, and there will be battles back and forth, and the political divide isn't going to suddenly disappear because Joe Biden is in the White House. But there is this back and forth, this tug of war that is occurring, that is going to continue to occur. And what I feel we can do best, rather than yelling at each other, is figure out ways that we can work together. And I am no Pollyanna, believe me. I have to deal with a lot of people whose politics are very different than mine. I go on a lot of radio shows that are very politically different from my perspective. I deal with a lot of clients who voted in a different party than I voted for, and so on and so forth. Some of them I can talk to. Some of them I can't. The ones that I can, I talk with. The ones that I can't, I don't fight with them. I just unfriend them or block them or, say, yeah, okay, fine. Because you're not going to change everybody's opinion. And in my opinion, the difference between ignorance and stupidity is ignorance is when your eyes are closed. Stupidity is when you close them again once they've been opened. And that's what I think is happening in this country. And that's what I try and work against. And I try and do it in a way that I think I might be able to get my point across. Not screaming and carrying on. There are times when I want to do that too. But I don't think that that's going to do anything. And I think that that's what Pluto is trying to teach us. And the way that sometimes the planets, so to speak, teach us is by pushing us hard. Saturn transits are never fun. But if you deal with them, when you're done, what do you know? You get the goodies, you get the raise, you get the promotion, you get whatever it is you're looking for. Pluto is pushing us, and it is telling us that if we do not make massive changes in how we deal with each other, with the environment, with all of this, with everything that is collective, 8th house, Pluto, we're in trouble. Okay.
Can I make a little bit of a comment? I am drawn back to what Chad was talking about, the right and left brain. And he made a comment that kind of really struck me about empathy for the whole. And that to me seems to be the message of the north node of Pluto. Pluto is on its own south node right now, revealing all of this stuff coming out from the down below, whatever. And the polarity point of that position is Cancer. And that to me goes back to empathy for the whole and inclusion and just being kind to one another and wanting to and being open to other people's opinions.
Yeah,
I agree.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I also think that one of the problems is that, well, as Daniel pointed out, people are hurting. They're angry, they're hurt, they're scared. You're taking away what we believe we deserve, or whatever term you want to use. And that's a very important thing to remember, that the people who stormed the Capitol, I mean, some of them were lunatics and wore horns, I get it. But I think a lot of them honestly believed that they were making a political statement. We all have our opinion about what that means. But if you can reach somebody on an emotional level, which is what I think Sue was making, then maybe you can change that. I'm not going to change my mind by screaming at me and yelling at me and telling me I'm an idiot. But if you say to me, oh, I understand how you feel, I'm so sorry, let's talk about that. You might just find that the person has a soul in there. I don't know. I hope for the best, that's all. I have to be an optimist. I can't help myself. As much as I'm frightened by what's happening, just like we all are. And I'm afraid, and I'll tell you, I had a client today, before we talked, who owns property in the Southwest. And he's trying to decide what to do with it. The housing market has exploded there. I said to him, well, if I owned any property there, I would be selling it. And I would put my money in, interest-bearing stocks and bonds and wait and see what happens, because they're going to run out of water and you're not going to be able to give those houses away. And in Miami, where I lost a dear friend in that building that collapsed, in Surfside, I have some clients who own property on Miami Beach. I begged them not to buy it. I said, well, you're crazy. This is ridiculous. Why? Well, we love it down there. So rent. Why would you put your money into that? Because Miami Beach is a sandbar. It's not going to be there. The coast of New Jersey isn't going to be there. Who knows if Long Island is going to survive, or the Bahamas, or anything else. These things frighten me to death. Because if the world changes that radically, well, then all of our intellectual and even heartfelt things are going to be meaningless when people are eating each other, because there's nothing left. That's where we're at. That's why we're talking about Pluto. That's why we get together here and in astrological conferences and in all, not just astrology, but in all places, because we're at the end of, we don't have a second planet to go to. We're not going to fly rockets up and then colonize Mars or the moons of Jupiter or anything else. Maybe the soul moves on. Maybe when Earth is no longer inhabitable, we'll go to a planet in another part of the galaxy. I don't know. I'm not that smart. But I do know, as far as Earth goes, I think it's a pretty nice place. I like the ocean. I like lakes. I love all the animals. There's so many different kinds, and they're wonderful to pet. And I'd like to see that continue for a while. I don't want to see it end. And that makes me angry. And that, when I hear people claiming there is no global warming, it's a democratic, the Democratic Party made up global warming.
Okay.
And there are fires in the West that are so bad that on the East Coast, we can't breathe. People are having problems. Go ahead, Sue. I'm sorry.
What do you think? What do you say we wrap this up? And, if anybody else has a closing comment, we're approaching 2 hours here. So
I agree.
I'll just answer your question there, Sue. Yeah, I think taking the big picture here, it's like we're in the process of individuation. The human being used to be embedded in a collective sense. There was no I, it was a we. Prior to the axial period, there was tribal consciousness. Human beings actually are the only primate that blushes. And the reason we blush is because we have an investment in each other. And it requires empathy. And the reason that the human Homo sapien won all the other hominids is because we were more empathetic with each other. We have more communication capacity. Now, what's happening is a differentiation of the individual from the whole. And this was accelerated at the American and French revolutions to give every individual individual rights. But what's happening is we're not actually separate. The impulse is to separate, to differentiate from the whole. And that's where the left brain is necessary to forge, to carve out and separate. But we have to move back into right brain, empathetic orientation towards wholeness, recognizing our collectiveness, that we're still united, that we're not actually separate from one another. And the astrological perspective is something that can help us do that, specifically because it recognizes the individual and its autonomy and its uniqueness and its magic, but within the whole. You're not separate, you're connected to the cosmos, we're connected to each other. And we only know ourselves in relationship ultimately. So we're at a crossroads, a threshold moment where we have to move beyond the individuated individual that's been forged, that's precious to us, that's important, that was necessary, and humble ourselves to the collective, to each other, and the responsibility we have for the planet and things beyond ourselves. So I think that's what ultimately is up, and the Pluto return can help be part of that transformation that's taking place. When I was mentioning Trump, I was pointing out, because like if we don't change, we're going to end up like him. Like that's the trajectory we're going, left hemisphere, and it's self-emulating. It's suicidal. Like he's collapsed his world into nothingness because he lives in his own little box, because the left hemisphere cuts it off from the whole. And so he believes only his own mind, his own reality. And that's kind of what we're doing too. So we need to break beyond ourselves and open up to the whole. And it's the right brain and empathy, the moon, Neptune, Jupiter, Venus, whereas the left hemisphere is Pluto, the sun, Mercury, and the harsh part of Saturn. The moral part of Saturn is on the right hemisphere, in the sense of what's right and wrong for the whole. But there's an immoral part of the left hemisphere that doesn't have a proper Saturn, but it is Saturn that it cuts everything off and separates. So it's not, you can't just isolate the two archetypes specifically, but it can be helpful in helping ourselves guide ourselves towards the archetypes that are most helpful: the moon, Jupiter, Venus, love. If that makes sense.
You just summarized the entire process of evolution from from separation from source, and the return, and Lucifer is the influences that make us separate. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe so. Intimation towards that.
Okay, our next U.S. Pluto return panel will be on November 11th. Please join us. Mitchell, do you have any closing?
No, I just want to thank Chad and Daniel very much. As I said before, we don't always agree on everything, but that's part of the fun of meeting with like-minded, or not always like-minded, but with intelligent and thinking people. And Sue, I want to thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to the next one. Let's sharpen our swords and come back.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.